In the winter of 1959, 10 young hikers set out into the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. They weren't amateurs looking for a weekend getaway. These were students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Elite, highly disciplined, and physically peak mountaineers. Their goal was Mount Otorten, a grueling Category 3 cross-country ski trek that, if completed, would earn them the highest hiking certification available in the USSR. They were vibrant, funny, and deeply collaborative. We know this because they left behind diaries, letters, and rolls of film filled with jokes, songs, and candid smiles. Hey guys, real quick, I'm back after not posting for over a year. I've been working on other projects outside of YouTube, planning to drop a new video on this channel twice a month moving forward. So, thank you all for the support. Okay, so let's unpack this story. Now, I told you that there was 10 hikers on this journey, but on January 28th, a student named Yuri Yudin suffered a severe flare-up of sciatica. The pain in his joints was too intense to continue. He had to turn back alone to the nearest settlement. It was a heartbreaking moment for the group, but it would ultimately save his life. As Yudin hugged his friends goodbye, he had no way of knowing he was looking at them alive for the last time. Now, the group was 9, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. They pushed deeper into the wilderness. By the way, sorry if I don't pronounce some of these names correctly. On February 1st, the weather turned brutal. Blinding snowstorms and dropping temperatures forced the group to make a choice. Instead of pushing through the pass to a sheltered forest lower down, Dyatlov decided to pitch their tent right on the exposed, frozen slope of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl. In English, it translates to something deeply unsettling: Dead Mountain. Why pitch a tent on an exposed, wind-blasted slope instead of dropping down into the tree line just a mile away? Experts think Dyatlov didn't want to lose the altitude they had worked so hard to gain, or perhaps he wanted to practice camping on an open slope for future expeditions. Their diaries show they were in high spirits. They ate dinner, wrote a satirical newspaper to pass the time, and settled into their sleeping bags around 9 or 10 p.m. Then, the diaries stopped. The cameras stopped. By February 12th, Dyatlov was supposed to send a telegram to their sports club announcing their safe return. The date came and went. No telegram arrived. At first, families weren't worried. Delays in the Russian winter were standard. But by February 20th, the silence became deafening. Relatives demanded action. A rescue team of volunteers, soldiers, and planes was scrambled into the wilderness. They flew over the snowy wastes, searching for any sign of life. On February 26th, on the lonely, frozen slope of Dead Mountain, they found it. And the modern world has been trying to make sense of it ever since. When the search party reached the tent, the scene didn't just look like an accident. It looked like a nightmare. The tent was mostly buried, but it was still standing on one side. When the investigators moved closer, they noticed something impossible. The tent hadn't been torn open by the wind, and it hadn't been attacked from the outside. It had been slashed open with knives from the inside out. Whatever happened in that tent happened so fast and was so profoundly terrifying that the hikers didn't even have time to unbutton the entrance. They cut their way out in a blind panic. But it gets weirder. Inside the tent were all their belongings. Their heavy winter coats, their boots, their food, and their flashlights were all left behind. Outside, investigators found footprints preserved in the hard-packed snow. There were 8 or 9 pairs of tracks leading down the slope toward the forest a mile away. The footprints showed that these elite hikers, in negative 30-degree weather, were walking down a mountain barefoot, in their socks, or wearing a single boot. But the tracks didn't show people sprinting for their lives. The footprints indicated a calm, orderly, almost synchronized walk. They weren't running from a monster or a killer. They were walking together, freezing to death toward the trees. The searchers followed the tracks down the slope. entering the forest line under a massive ancient cedar tree. Underneath that cedar tree, they found the remains of a small, pathetic fire. And beside it, the first two bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonyshenko. They were dressed only in their underwear. Their hands were deeply burned, charred by the fire. When investigators looked up, they noticed that the lower branches of the massive cedar tree were snapped off up to 16 feet high. Now, the hikers had frantically clawed their way up the bark, tearing the skin off their hands, either desperately trying to see back up the hill toward their tent or trying to escape something on the ground. Between the cedar tree and the tent, scattered across the open snow, the searchers found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their bodies were positioned in a straight line facing the tent. Their frozen hands were reaching out. They had been trying to crawl back to the camp when the cold took them. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, but the autopsies concluded all 5 of these individuals had died of pure hypothermia. In the medical world, there is a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of hypothermia, the freezing brain misinterprets a drop in blood pressure as a hot flash. Victims feel like they are burning alive and they strip off their clothes right before they die. That explained the underwear, it explained the fire. The case seemed tragic but straightforward. A group got scared, fled into the cold, and froze. But then, the spring thaw arrived. 2 months later, in May, as the heavy snow began to melt, the search party looked deeper into a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. Deep under 4 meters of snow, they found the remaining 4 hikers: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles. Again, hopefully I pronounced those names correctly. And the hypothermia narrative completely shattered. These 4 weren't lightly dressed. They were wearing pieces of clothing taken from their dead friends under the cedar tree. They had tried to survive, but they didn't die of the cold. They died of horrific, violent internal trauma. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had a massive crushed skull fracture that drove pieces of bone into his brain. Semyon Zolotaryov had his entire chest cavity caved in with multiple broken ribs. Lyudmila Dubinina also suffered massive thoracic trauma. Her ribs were completely shattered, her heart crushed by the impact. According to the examining doctor, Boris Vozrozdeny, the force required to cause this level of internal damage was astronomical. It was equivalent to a high-speed car crash or the shock wave of an explosion. But here is the detail that baffled the investigators. There was no external trauma. There were no bruises, no cuts, no soft tissue damage that matched the broken bones. It was as if their skeletons had been crushed by an invisible, uniform wall of immense pressure. And then came the visceral anomalies. Lyudmila Dubinina was found lying face down in a small stream of running meltwater. Her eyes were completely missing. Her tongue and the floor of her mouth had been torn out. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyeballs. To make matters even more surreal, when investigators tested the clothing of these victims, several garments showed highly abnormal levels of radiation. Faced with crushed bones, missing faces, radioactive clothing, and a tent slashed from the inside, the Soviet authorities blinked. They abruptly closed the case in May 1959. Their official conclusion was a masterpiece of Cold War doublespeak. They stated that the hikers had died due to a compelling natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. The files were locked away in a secret archive. The pass was closed to the public for years, and a mystery was born. For over 60 years, the phrase compelling natural force has acted as a blank canvas for human imagination. Who or what was the culprit on Dead Mountain? Let's look at the primary suspects. Suspect 1 was the Mansi tribesmen, or fugitive criminals. Early in the 1959 investigation, Soviet police suspected the indigenous Mansi people. Kholat Syakhl was their territory, and there was a theory that the hikers had stepped on sacred ground and been hunted down. Others suggested a group of escaped Gulag prisoners had stumbled across the camp. The evidence against. This theory falls apart the moment you look at the physical environment. There were no other footprints in the snow. Zero. None. The only tracks belonged to the 9 hikers. Furthermore, nothing was stolen from the tent. Money, expensive cameras, alcohol, and valuable winter gear were left completely untouched. Neither indigenous hunters nor desperate fugitives leave a gold mine of supplies behind. So, I doubt this theory. Another suspect was theories of the Cold War military experiment. Because of the radiation found on the clothing, the military cover-up, and reports from another hiking group 30 miles away who claimed to see glowing orange spheres floating in the night sky on February 1st. Many believe the group walked into a secret weapons testing zone. The theory goes that a Soviet missile was tested or malfunctioned over the mountain. A fuel-air explosive or a radiological weapon detonated in the air above them. The blast wave caused the internal crushing injuries to the hikers in the ravine, contaminated their clothes with radiation, and the toxic fumes or flash of light drove them out of the tent in a panic. Okay, possible. But a reality check. While the Soviet Union was undeniably testing rockets at the time, there are no military records of a launch that night. More importantly, the radiation wasn't widespread, it was highly localized, found only on a few pieces of clothing. Remember, many of these students worked in laboratories and nuclear facilities at their university. They likely contaminated their own gear long before they ever set foot on the mountain. As for the missing eyes and tongue, the bodies in the ravine sat in a wet, thawing creek for 3 months. Scavengers, bacteria, and natural decomposition in running water almost always target the softest tissues first, the eyes and the tongue. So, if it wasn't killers and it wasn't a Soviet missile, what are we left with? Suspect 3, the ghost avalanche. For decades, scientists dismissed the idea of an avalanche. The slope of Kholat Syakhl was too gentle, only about 23 to 28 degrees, and there was no visible avalanche debris found by the rescue team 3 weeks later. But in 2021, 2 Swiss researchers, Johann Gaume from EPFL and Alexander Puzerin from ETH Zurich, published a groundbreaking study that may have finally solved the mechanical mystery. They proved that the hikers unknowingly created their own trap. When Dyatlov's group set up camp, they made a deep horizontal cut into the snowbank on the slope to nestle their tent into a flat surface, protecting it from the wind. It was standard survival practice. But beneath that top layer of snow lay a fragile, hidden layer of brittle ice called hoarfrost. By cutting into the snow, they took away the structural support holding the upper slope in place. Then, the katabatic winds took over. These are heavy, incredibly dense, gravity-driven winds that rush down mountain slopes. Throughout the night, these winds slowly drifted heavy, packed snow down the mountain, piling it up silently on the slope directly above the tent. Between 7 and 13 hours after the hikers made that cut, the weight became too much. The fragile underlayer fractured. A slab avalanche, not a massive wave of snow, but a dense, heavy, solid block of frozen snow, the size of a car, slid down and landed directly on top of the sleeping hikers. For me, this explains everything. The immense, uniform weight of that frozen slab slamming down onto the hikers as they lay flat on their backs inside the tent perfectly explains the shattered skulls and caved-in ribs without causing external bruises. Trapped under a heavy, suffocating block of snow, injured and bleeding, the uninjured hikers used their knives to slash open the canvas from the inside to drag their dying friends out. They fled the tent because they feared a second, larger avalanche was coming to bury them alive. They walked down the mountain to the tree line to build a shelter and a fire, but in the pitch black, in a raging blizzard, with major injuries and no winter gear, they simply ran out of time. The fire wasn't enough. They succumbed to the cold, one by one, some trying to dig a snow den in the ravine that eventually collapsed on them, others dying as they crawled back to find their gear. Now, the 2021 Swiss study doesn't answer every single question. It can't tell us the final words spoken under that cedar tree or the exact sequence of who died first. In the end, science can only recreate the physics, not the human experience. But stripping away the aliens, the government cover-ups, and the monsters doesn't make the Dyatlov Pass incident any less terrifying. In fact, it makes it worse. It reminds us that the true horror of our world doesn't hide in secret government bunkers or supernatural legends. It lives in the quiet, invisible physics of nature. A slight miscalculation of a slope, a shifting wind, and a fragile layer of ice were all it took to turn a journey of bright, brilliant young minds into one of the greatest, most haunting tragedies of the 20th century. They didn't run from a monster, they ran from the mountain itself. And the mountain won. Thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe for updates. Also, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. I'll leave them in the description below. Until next time, good night.